I don't want to do this. I don't want to get up today and I don't want to go to tutoring. I don't want to be a tutor today, and I'm tired. No. That's when you dig down deep and you're like, you know what, let's go, bring it on. To move away from that word success and concentrate on another word, and that's significance. I want to make a difference. I want to have an impact in the lives of the students that I'm teaching. Success is what we do. We are successful people. Significance is what we do for other people. And I think that's what your tutors do. What you do as a tutor, you have a significant impact on another human being.
Welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes.
Welcome to the next episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. We are very excited today to be joined by Terry Tucker, all the way from the United States, who's tuning in today early morning. Whereas here, I'm sitting here at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, slightly different times of the day, but very much looking forward to this. So welcome, Terry.
Thank you, Ludo. I appreciate the opportunity to be on and talk with you today.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So Terry, really just as a little introduction, Terry has overcome more than a lifetime's pain and suffering, really, and that's just since February of last year, when he was left with no other option than to amputate his left leg above the knee. So there's a great deal that Terry has to kind of teach us today. Now, as in the conversations I've had with Terry beforehand, I've learned that Terry speaks on multiple platforms and podcasts and radio programs, and has given speeches to almost every walk of life. But today, we're going to be exploring Terry's quest for learning. Each time something was taken from him, he fought on, and his message will inspire you to seek new answers to your learning difficulties. So we'll dive right in, and regular listeners of this podcast will know that there's the one question that we like to start with. So Terry, what kind of student were you?
I was an above average student in grammar school and high school, and an average student in college. My freshman year at a Catholic high school in Ohio, I was required to take Latin as a foreign language. And Latin was very difficult for me, but it helped me in my English classes as I progressed through high school and college. I had a very difficult time with math and science courses throughout my entire learning career, but I excelled in English and language classes. And I took honors level English and Spanish classes when I was in high school, and I really attribute that to the Latin that I took as a freshman in high school. However, my first opportunity working with a tutor didn't happen until I was in my 40s, when I was working on an online master's degree. It had been easy over 20 years since I had sat in a classroom and taken a math course, and I was required to take a quantitative methods course to get my degree, and I was in way over my head. So I went to the high school math teacher at my daughter's school, and I asked him, I begged him if he, to tutor me, because I know without him, there's absolutely no way I would have been able to obtain my master's degree.
Okay, yeah. So that was a really important time for you to kind of come into contact with a tutor, was it?
Oh, totally. I mean, like I said, I was never good at math and science. I enjoy science. I find it interesting. It's just my brain works a little bit differently. English and languages are easier for me than math and science was. So like I say, without that math tutor, I wouldn't have been able to get my master's degree.
Yeah, no, I share your sentiments very much, Terry. I think sometimes unpicking, I have real respect for those tutors in maths and science who are able to unpick the complex equations and kind of, we've talked on this podcast before about math anxiety, which is a real problem because numbers and figures and equations can be so overwhelming. So yes, I certainly share a lot of what you're saying there, Terry. But I'm sure it shaped you kind of into your later life, and I really big fan of those questions because it helps to explore kind of who our guest is, who the individual is. So kind of moving on a little bit into kind of after education, although of course you mentioned there that you went back to education. How do you think kind of the various roles that you've had in your career have helped you to understand the power of learning?
So when I was young, my mother forced my brothers, I have two brothers, my brothers and I, to read every hour or read for an hour every day during the summer before we could go out and play with our friends. And because I was forced to read as a child, I didn't enjoy reading for pleasure. And in all honesty, it wasn't until after I graduated from college that I really began to enjoy reading. And I devote an entire chapter in my book, Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, to remaining curious and asking questions. The success that I've experienced in my professional career had a great deal to do with the interest and the desires to learn new things. In all honesty, and we've probably all done this, there were several jobs that I had that were just paychecks for me. The job or the industry didn't really have much of an appeal. Since I've been diagnosed with cancer, my purpose has kind of shifted, and it's really been to help other people find and live their purpose. And I recall we have an author here by the name of Mark Twain, kind of a folk author. And he had a great quote. And this is what he said. He said, the two most important days of our lives are the day that we're born and the day we figure out why. There's a reason that we were all born. And that reason involves finding and living your purpose. I believe that we're all destined to live uncommon and extraordinary lives. And that has nothing to do with the type of job we have, how much money we make, what kind of house we live in, what kind of car we drive, nothing like that. We're not all born with the same gifts and talents. We don't all learn the same way, but we all have the ability to become the best person that we're capable of becoming. The problem is that most people take an unintentional approach to living. And by living a casual life, their dreams, their goals, their ambitions become a casualty of that unplanned living. There's a Native American Blackfoot proverb that I heard years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. The only way to find your purpose is to search it out, to try things that make you uncomfortable, to fight against the status quo, to experience things that basically scare you. Finding your why or your purpose is essential because it's the reason you were born. Learning is critically important to being successful in anything that you do. However, if you're not passionate about the topic you're learning, it will make it that much harder to learn that subject. And as a result, if you're not interested, you won't be curious enough to want to learn about the topic. If our mother had made reading more enjoyable by possibly letting us play for a few hours before we read, I might have liked reading more and I might have been a better student.
I think it's very interesting what you're touching on there about, kind of finding your why. It's something that it's an ethos that really that we kind of extend to the tutors that we meet along the way. It's something that we form as a large part of the qualification that we have for tutors. And I think it's more important perhaps than in any other industry in education, because it is inspiring that learning within students that is really goes to the root of what we do as tutors. So I think what
Yeah,
you said there
without
about
you
finding
guys,
your
without
purpose.
tutors, you're right. You give young people an opportunity. And that's really all you can do. You give them an opportunity, then it's up for them to kind of pick up the ball and run with it. And if they don't, that's on them. It's not on you. But without you, without what you do to help kids, and you may never realize how important your job is. You know, some kid may not come back to you and say, hey, you know, Ludo, you helped me so much. You may never know, but I'm telling you, that whole industry makes a tremendous impact on young people.
Mm. And how important do those words ring right now, Terry, in a pandemic when it's hard to see the value of what you're doing, perhaps either because there aren't going to be exams at the end of this year, so there's no concrete measure, or because everyone's finding it hard to progress at this time. Having that hour a week with a tutor, although they may never tell that tutor, just as you say, you know, the effect that they've had, you know, how valuable is it to have that time every week where you check in and you play educational games and you have fun and you're able to talk about yourself. That really has never been more important as it is now. But you mentioned there something that we can't really hold this conversation without mentioning, Terry. You mentioned there a little bit about your book, Sustainable Excellence, and the 10 principles. What can you tell us a little bit more about how educators can get the most out of this book?
Sure. I guess maybe I can back up for a second, kind of tell you how the book sort of came to be. And it was really born out of two conversations that I had. One was with a former, I used to be a basketball coach, and one was with a former basketball player who I had a discussion with about finding and living her purpose. And the other one was a connection with a basketball player at the Citadel, where I went to college in Charleston, South Carolina, who reached out to me on LinkedIn. And this young man, he said, you know, what do you think are the most important things that I should learn to be successful, not only in my career, but in life as well? And I thought about my response for a while. I didn't want to give him the standard, you know, work hard, help others, show up early kind of thing. I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to develop principles that would resonate in his soul, to be honest with you. And eventually I started writing stuff down, and I came up with these 10 principles that I had experienced or learned over my life, and I was able to use my life experience or the experience of other people that I knew, stories of other people that I knew, and apply them to these principles. And one of the first stories that I talk about, actually in the introduction to Sustainable Excellence, is about the American football coach by the name of Vince Lombardi. And Lombardi had taken over one of the worst teams in the National Football League. And the first time he met with his players, this is what he said. He said, "Gentlemen, we will chase perfection and we will chase it relentlessly, knowing all the while that we will never obtain it. But along the way, we will catch excellence." As I said earlier, I believe that we're all destined to live uncommon and extraordinary lives. But how do you achieve that remarkable life in an age, especially now, where everyone seems to just be getting by? In Sustainable Excellence, I answer basically the 3 questions that will lead you to your best life, whatever that is. I mean, as a tutor, as a businessman, as an athlete, whatever you do. And those 3 questions are: what is excellence? How do you achieve it? And most importantly, how do you sustain it? There's a story that I included in Sustainable Excellence about a young lady who my wife and I know. In 7th grade, she was diagnosed with dyslexia, an anxiety disorder, and an attention disorder. And for several years, she worked very closely with a tutor who helped her to basically play to her strengths when it came to her learning, with colors and music and things like that. She was also afforded certain accommodations in school in terms of where and how she took her tests. And eventually, she was accepted to attend college at the United States Air Force Academy, but was not offered those same accommodations that she received in high school. However, because of the work she did with her tutor, she had the skill set to pass some very difficult math, science, and engineering classes that eventually led to her walking across the stage, receiving her diploma, and shaking hands with the President of the United States. That's the type of impact that tutors can have on their students. And my wife and I know the particulars of this story because that young woman is our daughter.
Wow. Yeah, there's a great deal to take from that, Terry. And you've mentioned this just at the right time, because one of the themes in our community is this month, or sorry, the theme of our tutoring community this month is special educational needs and disabilities. So that's dyslexia has come up a number of times, and it's been incredibly empowering or insightful to hear those stories, and for the tutors who either have dyslexic students or who themselves are dyslexic, it's been empowering for them to share their stories, as with that story, Terry. So thank you very much for sharing that.
You're welcome. I mean, our daughter still stays in touch with her tutor after all these years. And, when she was at the Air Force Academy, the tutor always asked her for a photograph, and she would put the photograph up on the bulletin board in her office, and students would inquire. It's like, who is that person? And she would tell her story. And by telling our daughter's story, she found that motivated some other students who may not have been interested in tutoring, but hey, you do this, you can get here. You can be at the pinnacle of learning and things like that. So it's even now, after she's out of it, she's still having an impact on young people through her tutor.
Exactly, the pathway to learning is a very powerful kind of message. Now, you've mentioned it there. You've talked about an uncommon and extraordinary path to learning success and to breaking down barriers. But I guess aside from that, what is, you mentioned this phrase, we all lead uncommon and extraordinary lives, and I really do love that phrase. It's not one that I've kind of I've never heard, but I've never even kind of thought about before. But what is uncommon and extraordinary about learning?
So I'll start off with something real positive, and that's a joke. So during my life, I have unfortunately seen many people die. The number of years that I've had cancer and I've known cancer patients, and the number of years that I was a police officer. And it's been my experience that people who die what we would probably call peaceful deaths are those who utilize their time on this earth to find and live their purpose. On the other hand, many of the people who I observe go kicking and screaming from this world, want another day or another month or whatever, those are people who never did anything with their lives. They never saw the urgency of living their uncommon and extraordinary life. They never took a chance on their dreams. They never took the time to figure out who they were, why they were here, and what they were supposed to do with their lives. It's been said that the wealthiest places on earth are our cemeteries because they're areas rich in businesses never started, books never written, relationships never pursued, dreams never realized. The only way to find your purpose, and I said this before, is to search it out, to do things that make you uncomfortable, to fight against the status quo. Finding your purpose is important because it's the reason you were born. And the only reason to discover that, or the only way to discover that reason, is to be open to it and search for it with your heart. But if you don't possess the knowledge or the skills necessary to pursue your dreams, you'll never be fulfilled as a human being. Can you imagine being in a situation where you know why you were put on this earth, but you don't have the knowledge or the ability to fulfill that purpose? How utterly devastated would you feel if you couldn't carry out your life's work? Tutors need to realize the importance of the role that they play in supporting and augmenting the educational system, at least here in the United States, of kind of one size fits all. Because the fact of the matter is, one size does not fit all. Not everyone learns the same knowledge in the same way. And our daughter, the example I just gave you, isn't a perfect example of that. And because of those unique learning differences, tutors are becoming even more important in reinforcing and enhancing the current educational systems.
Yeah, and that's really kind of, as we've said before, is a message that strikes home ever more, more than ever before, I guess, than kind of the time that they're currently in. And what a strange time as well. I mean, what an uncommon an extraordinary time we currently find ourselves in. I mean, I imagine that the feedback and the response to your book has been, even more compelling in recent months, because everyone's lives has been turned upside down. So those principles that you brought out have even more validity kind of in this current time. And I know the book was released in September of last year, so it was obviously written under this, in this climate. But I guess as the months have gone on, people have really realized how much has changed. So it's for education specifically in the UK and in the US, it's really become very apparent that learning has suffered in this time, and that, Julia Silva, the qualified tutor founder, recently described, tutors kind of as superheroes flying in, under the radar and kind of saving the day for many students. Now, obviously, that's a generalization, and it doesn't, not every student can be essentially saved in this way, but there is a great deal of value in seeing that tutors have come along in this time, and that they've provided an alternative to the school environment, which the online school environment, which has suffered so much. But kind of moving into what tutors can add value, or where tutors can add value. We value excellence and mastery in tutoring, very, very highly. And you said, the Vince Lombardi quote that you pulled out talked about how in striving for perfection, we pick up excellence along the way. But with that in mind, kind of the importance that we place on tutors, achieving excellence and mastery in their students. Alongside that, something we talked about before this podcast about, motivating students and motivating tutors. How do we sustain the motivation when those results towards excellence and mastery don't improve?
So I'll try to answer that with the ACT, the ACT acronym, and I don't know if you've heard this or your audience has heard this, but the A stands for alternatives, and that means finding alternatives or options and using them to adjust your techniques to overcoming your obstacle. Now, the C stands for consequences. So once you've got these alternatives, to understand the risk versus reward of each alternative and making an accurate assessment based on the client that you're tutoring. And then the T stands for task behavior, which basically means staying on task so that you're able to execute the strategies or the alternative that you decided to use. Now, I've never been a tutor, but I have been a high school basketball coach. And I used to conduct my practices as follows, really to try to give our team the best chance at success. I would first start out by concentrating on the fundamentals. And then once the fundamentals were mastered, I'd increase the intensity by which we practice those fundamentals. And finally, I'd add pressure to the intense execution of those fundamentals. And then towards the end of practice, we would take off the pressure and the intensity and just get back to focusing on the technique or the fundamental. Through the repetition of this process, the fundamentals become automatic. And I always wanted my practices to be harder than the game. You can use that same technique in tutoring. You start out by teaching the fundamentals of a subject to your student. And once the fundamentals are understood, you increase the intensity by adding more complicated problems. And then finally, you apply pressure by putting a time limit on how quickly those problems must be completed. And then eventually you take off the pressure and the intensity and you kind of wind down and get back to the fundamentals. Over time, by using this technique, the tutoring sessions are going to become like my practices, much more difficult than the tests that the students are going to be taking in school.
I feel like I could sense you moving towards that, but it was such a brilliant conclusion that you came to there. As soon as you talked about your practices being harder than the tests, I suddenly, or than the games, I suddenly thought, now hang on a minute, I think exams are going to come into this. But it's very much true, and not only do we make our sessions kind of rigorous and perhaps even more rigorous than an exam, but the sessions that we have one-on-one, kind of like more like a mentor than a tutor, will prepare our students for later life when the problems will be harder and more intense and they'll have to deal with them by themselves. That's kind of what we're inspiring, is inspiring students to become independent learners rather than having to kind of rely on drip fed or school structure, that kind of thing. And I guess your basketball players out on the court, when it's just them against their opponent, they were able to put that into practice. So that's a really helpful analogy there, Terry. Now, there's what you've provided there is a very practical model for tutors to use, and anyone listening to this now, if you're thinking of a way to move towards planning lessons that provide real value, there are certain structures. One of the structures that we often talk about is the learning loop, the assess, plan, teach, reassess loop that we're continually conducting, whether within one session or across a number of sessions. So that's a really helpful model to add to kind of building the fundamentals, increasing the intensity, and then applying pressure before finally kind of pulling off the pressure and going back to the fundamentals. It's a very similar loop. So thank you for bringing that up. Sure. But just to kind of to finish off here, it's been so much jam-packed into this already, Terry, and I've certainly picked up a great deal about kind of what we can transfer, and that's just as me as the host. But what do you think? What would you say are the top 3 lessons that can be taken from kind of stumbling across obstacles, but picking yourself back up again and working through them? That's something that you've done a lot of in your career and happens the whole time in learning.
Yeah, and again, I'll kind of close this with sort of a story. I have a Post-it note that I see every day when I sit down on my desk, and written on that Post-it note are 3 sentences that I kind of believe are my truths, and they remind me that no matter how difficult things get or how much I'm hurting during my cancer treatments, that these truths will guide me in my life. The first one is, you need to control your mind or it will control you. The second one is, you need to embrace the pain and the suffering you are experiencing in your life and use it to make you a stronger and more determined individual. And the third one is, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. I've been battling cancer for the last 9 years, and I'm currently in a clinical trial to determine the efficacy of a new drug. And recently I had a nurse suggest that I abandon the clinical trial that I'm on for these cancerous tumors in my lungs, because the trial, the medication, is really wreaking havoc on my body. And she said that nobody would think any less of me if I quit the trial. And I explained to her that my doctor may take me off this study, or I may die on this study, but I would never quit the study. I tried to explain to her that I have learned to internalize pain and suffering and use it as fuel or energy to keep me going. And by doing that, it makes me a stronger and more determined individual. The only easy day for any of us was yesterday. You must get up every morning with the understanding that you need to prove yourself again. According to Clive Woodward, the former coach of the UK national rugby team, this is what he said about success. He said, success can be attributed to how you function under pressure, how you understand your importance to the task at hand, and your willingness to do everything you do that day just 1% better. Can you imagine that over time, if we did whatever we do every day, just 1% better today, and we do it 1% better tomorrow, over the course of a month, we're 30% better at what we do every day. I mean, I'd love to be 30% better at what I do every day. Tutors, I'm sure, would love to be 30% better. Students would love to be 30% better. So if you can do that, if you can force your mind, even when you're hurting, even when I don't want to do this, I don't want to get up today and I don't want to go to tutoring. I don't want to be a tutor today, and I'm tired. No, that's when you dig down deep and you're like, you know what, let's go, bring it on. It's tough, but I want to do it because I want to make a difference. I want to have an impact in the lives of the students that I'm teaching.
Couldn't be more relevant than the current time, Terry. Could not be more relevant. And we've all found it much tougher, to wake up each morning when there's so much less to look forward to. But that's when the most successful and best tutors will dig deeper. So what a way to end. What a message to leave with. listeners switching off the podcast after this, taking their next stride into whatever they're doing, that's a brilliant way to finish, and leaves the door very much open for you to return to the podcast, Terry. I feel that there's, we've only very briefly touched on what you've learned throughout your career because of the experiences you've had, and kind of what more you can bring to learning, and perhaps there's future works in the pipeline. I'm sure that you're planning, there's new books in the pipeline the whole time, and we'd love to touch on those more. As ever, Terry is available to be contacted, to be reached out to be supported by, and his website motivationalcheck.com is a great place to start. On there you'll find the numerous platforms that he's taken advantage of to spread the message and spread the word. This podcast will be going live as ever on all the platforms, and on you can find it on our website as well. But there is great scope for you to reach out to Terry and to be supported by what he's learned. So Terry, thank you very, very much for joining us. That was a rocket-powered conversation, and there's so much to take from that, as all of your podcasts are, Terry.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the forum that you give people like me to try to get our word out or our message out. And as we've talked before, my message is just really try to make people's lives better and put as much good back into the world as I can. Yeah.
Well, it's a very it's a virtuous thing that you're doing, and you're touching a lot of people along the way, Terry. So thank you very much, and we will welcome you back onto the podcast, I'm sure, very, very soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Terry. Bye then.
Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org, or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you, because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.